Hey, welcome. If you've been watching my build videos, then you're probably interested in the layout, so I thought it would be time for a tour. So to get started, let me just explain. The layout is basically a figure eight, although a heavily deformed figure eight, and it's a double track figure eight. So here's where the crossover happens. We have what I'm going to refer to as the orange line and the blue line, and then they cross over here as the blue line and the orange line. This track is what I'm going to refer to as the yellow line, which is a reversing loop. This layout has 5 reversing loops in it, so it's kind of a complicated layout. The orange and the blue track are the main lines, and each one is its own power district. I'm going to talk a little bit about the wiring. I could probably do an entire video on the wiring. So anyway, each is its own power district, and that means that if one has a short, then the other will continue to operate. So they each have their own power supply, and they're insulated from each other. The first part of the layout that I built was basically a 4x12 section, and I built that on foam. And let me kind of run through that area. So starting at this end up here, we have the yellow line that comes down here. We have the graffiti wall. This is going to be a pond. We come over here. I wanted some street running, so this was my attempt at street running. This is just track running through kind of a concrete area. It was about 3 applications of Woodland Scenics Smooth It to get this to work, and it mostly works. Some engines will kind of stall out on some of the areas. Others will make it through all the way with no trouble. And there is actually a feeder line. I was smart enough to put a feeder line in underneath before I put the Smooth It in. A little more background on the design. The first year that I was thinking about building the layout, I started building some buildings, and then I ended up designing the layout around the buildings. This is one of the sections where I started with the buildings and then designed the layout around the buildings. So we have some Walthers buildings here, and then behind them is what is about 5 feet of viaduct. So most of this is the micro-engineering double-track urban viaduct, but then there's a couple micro-engineering girders. And the piers that you see I built out of wood myself. If you look at the catalog or the box art or whatever for the double track viaduct, it runs behind a building, and I thought that was a really cool look. So I designed my layout to run behind this Walthers hardware building, the 4-story building here. And this 4-story building is one of the early buildings that I built, and I'm not very happy with it, and I'm probably going to rebuild it, and that might be the topic of a future video. I'm not entirely happy with any of these plastic buildings, but we'll see which ones I keep and which ones I don't. I get rid of. The street running section here is part of the yellow line, and I'm probably going to replace it, and I'll explain why in a minute. I'm not sure how far back up I'm going to replace it. Probably back up to this pond area at least. I should say that I'm not modeling any particular era, although I was intended on doing modern, so I wanted to run stack trains and run modern locomotives, and I had a lot of graffiti that I wanted to put in. And really the theme was a lot of abandoned and decrepit buildings. I really like those. I think they look interesting in real life, so I decided to put a lot of those in. But one of the scenes I really wanted was track that runs through really muddy conditions and is almost flooded. And this is one of those scenes. So here we have some track that runs under the viaduct area. And this is some Woodland Scenics water that's poured in here. And I actually can run a 4-axle diesel through here. A 6-axle will not make it, but a 4-axle will. In terms of the wiring, one of the books that I read said that you should put feeder wires about every 3 feet or so, which seems kind of ridiculous. I tried to go about every 6 to 9 feet, and so obviously with this viaduct, I couldn't really put feeder wires in the viaduct. I think this one's probably 4-foot viaduct. So I had to make sure to put them as close as possible to the ends. Here we have an Athearn DDA40X. And when I decided to build the layout, I decided I was going to make it so that I could run the DDA40X on all of the main lines and most of the reversing loops. And I was mostly successful in doing that. And I thought about even making a video about how to do that. So this is kind of sitting here to remind me of that. Another design requirement that I had was I wanted to be able to run 89-foot auto racks around all the main lines and then most of the reversing loops as well. And I was mostly successful in that. There's a few problems. One of the reasons I want to redo this track, this is still the yellow line, is we have this S-curve, and you can see how it wreaks a little bit of problem with the auto racks coming in here. So I want to smooth out this S-curve. And here you can see the mud within the track, and really all this is just sculpt-a-mold that I put in there and then very carefully cleared out along the rails to make sure that the locomotives and the cars could pass through over that. So originally, where this pink ends and the green starts, this pink was the end of the 12-foot section, and then there was going to be the turnaround area. And these two tracks are very close together because they were going to run into a tunnel. I decided I had more room, and so I extended the layout by another 8 feet, and that is the green foam that you'll be seeing. And that is one of the reasons that this track is a little bit messed up, and so I want to redo it. Another thing is I really don't like foam, and I want to redo this section with the track laid onto wood. And by the way, I used a cork roadbed on most of it. There's a few areas like the sidings and stuff where I wanted the track at the same level as the ground, and so I didn't raise it up on cork, but almost everything is on cork. So my preference is really for cork on top of wood for your sub-roadbed. All right, so we're continuing down the yellow line. This area is going to be a swamp. If you watched my video on the Bar Mills Fishing Shack, I mentioned putting it in the swamp, and this is the swamp area. Here you can see the main line double track as it crosses over the yellow line. Here again we have the main lines, the blue and the orange, and then the third track is just a runaround track for those. And then on the inside we have the yellow line and then this other reversing loop inside, and then these will be inside tunnels. Here we have the end of the green foam. So this is the 8-foot section of green foam. And here the main lines come down off the wood for the curve and back onto the foam. And one of the things you really notice is that the train becomes louder as it goes from the wood onto the foam. So the foam is actually louder than the wood. That's one of the things that kind of annoys me. So I might redo this whole section of main line that comes down along the edge of the track. You'll see more of that. If you watched my video on how to install a turnout over existing track, this would look familiar to you. This is after the retaining wall has been put in. So then we have it's going to go to this bridge, which I currently call the bridge to nowhere because I don't really know where it's going to go. It might go around to a staging yard. There up on top again you can see the main line, the blue and the orange. And then one of the features I really wanted to have was a siding that kind of just went into a puddle and ended at the puddle. So you can see there's the puddle. That's Woodland Scenics water, the resin stuff. And you can see it's a little bit dusty actually. My original design was built around 6 buildings. So on this side is 3 of the buildings. This is some Walther's Cornerstone kit. I don't remember the name of it. And then we have the grocery distributor that was in a previous build video. And then we have what I think is the Water Street Freight House, which is going to be in another build video. I'm going to rebuild that one. It's in pieces now because I kind of tried to rip it apart to redo it, but I decided it's going to be better just to rebuild the whole thing. And here we have the mainline crossovers. This was some of the first track that I ever put down, and so I didn't do a really great job. I kind of feel like I want to replace all 3 tracks here, redo this whole section, and in the process I might decide to get rid of these 3 buildings and put something else in this particular spot. So behind those we can see the viaduct the double track viaduct. And behind the freight house, we can see some more of the track kind of running through the water. So this was on foam. So what I did is I cut out a hole in the foam and then glued in more foam lower, and then I filled in the depression with Sculptamold, and then ran the track through that, and then I poured the resin water around it. So here we can see part of the crossover. We have the orange and blue lines, I'm not sure which is which in this case, and then the yellow line, which is the reversing track. And then you can see how they go back up and under the bridge for the crossover. And then I also wanted some puddles. I wanted to have puddles in my parking lot, so here's a puddle. This track that goes off into the tunnel is another reversing loop. So it goes through a tunnel, and we'll see where it comes out on the other side. The layout is an L shape, and it's about 25 feet by 20 feet, and it's generally 4 feet wide except on the ends where I had to make it much wider to accommodate the higher radiuses. So one of the features that I really wanted was a big long viaduct that comes down and has track on both sides. That was a kind of a specific requirement. And this is very loosely based off the C&O viaduct that used to exist in Cincinnati. And it's very loosely because that viaduct was huge, but I thought it was a really cool looking viaduct. So this is a sloping viaduct, and it is 9 feet long. It is actually three 3-foot sections of microengineering bridge track. So starting at this end, we have a Central Valley Truss Bridge, and then we have, how many? 7 microengineering 85-foot girder bridges, and then it slopes down to the end. So the challenge, of course, is building these bridge piers and having them out at the correct height with each transition down the slope. And it's not a constant slope. It starts out very gradual, and then it steepens, and then it finishes up gradual. And then this bridge is just high enough that you can get a stack train double stack underneath both of those. So here we are looking at it again, coming down the viaduct. And there's the ramp up to it with a retaining wall. Another design requirement was I wanted a maximum 2% grade. If you do the math and you want to have a 2% grade that gets you up high enough that you can run a double stack train underneath it, you need about 16 feet of track to climb that grade. So I knew I wasn't going to make that with the viaduct. So you can see here that the viaduct, this one is 2.9% here, so it's about a 3% grade. That was the math that I did, and that's just for the viaduct. I mostly hit the 2% maximum on all the main lines. So coming down to this other end of the L, we have 4 tracks going around. And you can see we have a yellow line and then the purple line, which is actually the viaduct line. And then in the middle is the orange and the blue lines. So this section here that's open will become something. Some buildings will go there. I'm not entirely sure what yet. So here we have the other end of the slope, and it says 2.5% grade. I don't think it's that steep. I didn't zero out the level before I put it on there. I think this one's more like 1.8 or so. So of these 4 tracks, the outside is the yellow, the reversing loop, and then you can see up here where it connects into the main line. The middle 2 tracks are the main line, and then the outside track that you see here, the purple track, goes around to the viaduct. One of the scenes I really wanted was a train going through a trench. I saw a picture of a really cool trench scene, and I kind of tried to recreate it. I didn't really do a very good job, but as we get up here, there's going to be a tunnel portal there, and then the line is going to come out down through here and reconnect back up actually to the yellow line. These 4 tracks that kind of run down the slope, I had kind of hoped I could replicate something that looked kind of like Cassandra, but I really don't have enough room to get all the scenery in to do that. And then here you can also see there's a turnout that's in place, but it doesn't actually go anywhere. It's going to go up to this section over here. We'll take a look at that next. So starting there, we have the bridges that are the crossovers of the main lines, and it comes around here and kind of pairs up with the viaduct line, and it goes on down into what we'll call Cassandra. And then in this middle part, that would be the tunnel portal. So this section is all in a tunnel, and it goes around underneath. So there you can see the turnout that's coming off, and then it's going to come up to this section, which will be more buildings of some type. I'm not entirely sure. Some kind of yard or something.